So yeah, that's the point I guess I'll leave on, but is that, you know, the renewable option, you know, is more efficient, less emissions, and saves us money. That's all I've got, short time, but yeah, get involved if you're interested. We have a Brisbane team here as well. Emma down the front can talk to you if you want to get involved here. Otherwise, yeah, do feel free to sign up and become a base-load supporter. Thanks. Oh, okay. Yeah, so there's a bit of time for questions. So there's actually some mics if you want to just line up behind the mics, and I'll talk to you. Thank you.
That last graph of yours, Trent, when talking about the spikes and the costs associated with those peak demand spikes, I would also say that a lot of the information that's being presented, what we're seeing is a massive increase in the storage capacity, in building storage capacity of energy, renewables, through new battery technology, for example, and actually using thermal mass and all sorts of storage devices to sort of redistribute the energy to further flatten those peaks and spikes, and then actually take advantage of the market by being able to operate at low cost times of the day, for example, when the energy costs are lower, and then re-release it back at the top at the end of it. So I'd just like you to be able to comment a little bit on that, please.
Yeah, well, that's a really important point. And, you know, from when you look at it from a peak point of view, you know, there are enormous savings in efficiency. So by reducing demand, you know, doing all the things, improving the building envelope, putting in new chillers, you know, all those things you're going to have, and you know, replacing the lighting, the equipment, you know, they really help on the days when you know, the peak days. So that in itself will help to shave off additional amounts of peak. In terms of battery storage, you know, we're not necessarily saying that we should be looking to be off grid, or that, you know, we certainly think it's good to be interactive with the grid as a sort of battery store. But you know, we can do other things that we maybe don't need a battery storage device to store energy. So an example could be with in-home displays in homes of actually, you know, if you have a 4.5 or 5 kilowatt system PV, which the results, I didn't mention, the results from our analysis about rooftop capacity means that per house you have in the order of 4 to 5 kilowatts of PV. That's going to be, you know, thumping energy at sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a hot sunny day. And so if you have a well-insulated building envelope, you can actually look at turning on your air conditioner remotely at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, maybe 4. You're still generating some power from your system, and actually use that power to sort of pre-cool your house before you get home. So you can avoid any of those more catastrophic peak events. And I think that, you know, there are other opportunities for that sort of stuff as well. You could actually schedule when you turn your hot water system on, when you boost your hot water system. You know, there's all manner of opportunities. A question here.
Trent, Vicky Ullman from Skills Tech. When you compared the use of gas with solar power and trigen, did you use a life cycle costing methodology or analysis methodology in that?
You mean for this?
Well, for instance, including the embodied energy and the manufacture of the appliances, the transport of the gas, for instance, versus the cost of the panels for the solar panels, that sort of stuff, the embodied energy?
No, we haven't. I mean, that'd be a very complex analysis. We did actually commission a consultancy to investigate the life cycle emissions from unconventional gas sources through a range of technologies, generation technologies, such as, in comparison to them, so as well as for a combined cycle gas turbine or a tri-generation system, versus, say, renewables from a life cycle emissions point of view. Unfortunately, the conclusions of that study were were quite damning for the coal seam gas industry, and that consultancy was fairly embedded in the coal seam gas industry and refused to release the report. And we got a bit of media about it. You were welcome to look into it a bit more. But this is an indication of the level of, there's a real sort of lack of debate about that, and a factoring in of the real emissions. As I said, the 15% venting. I mean, that's a pretty worst case. But all the reporting for unconventional gas sources assumes 0.1%, but it just assumes 0.1%. There's no monitoring being done. But on the flip side, I mean, you look at it like what's happening in the City of Sydney thing is that they're actually putting in new infrastructure, very large infrastructure, which includes installing an absorption chiller that's going to sit alongside your old electric vapor compression chiller. So it's increasing the amount of stuff that we have, and the amount of absorption chiller has been around for a while, obviously, but my understanding is that they're harder to maintain. There's less experience in Australia with them. There's probably more ongoing costs associated with them than chillers, which are fairly simple, well established technology. So I'd hesitate to guess that actually the tri-generation option is pretty terrible. Feel free to ask me some questions. I can take the curly ones.
Trent, hi.
I just had a question about building codes in Australia in terms of implementing more efficient buildings in the future. Building codes have been important to stop any inefficient things being built. Is there any conversation happening with building codes and urban bodies and that kind of thing?
Well, I should mention this is predominantly looking at existing buildings, which we think is I guess the core challenge. At the end of the day, I mean, as poorly performing as a 6-star house is, it's still better than probably what's in the stock. So we do need to address that, and there's actually very few schemes in place to deal with existing buildings. Obviously, Neighbours is helping to, I guess, shed light on how the actual performance of buildings, but that's something that's something that needs to be furthered. But yeah, in terms of your question, I mean, what we're seeing, I mean, I guess one of the goals we might look at saying is that if you take actually Pitt and Sherry did a study called the Indicative Stringency Report and Pathways to 2020, and they've addressed a lot of what you're saying from commercial and residential point of view, and where they could drive things. And there's some interesting conclusions from that. From a residential point of view, the cost, the point at which you have a cost-effective star rating is like 7 to 8 stars across most of Australia. But they also, another study was commissioned that found that you could get an extra star just by improving the orientation of the building. So with no added costs, you can add an extra star to that. So it could be 8 to 9 stars, 7 to 9 maybe, which is really far beyond what we're talking about at the moment. But the same thing goes for commercial, and they found that for supermarkets there was enormous potential because you can do that stuff and get 74% reduction, and then you've got a whopping big surface area on your roof for PV. So you whack in the PV, and you're looking in a lot of cases at buildings which are net generators. And I know that the Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency is looking at developing improved rating schemes so that they can account for this reality where PV becomes cost effective in itself compared to buying from the grid. And they're thinking, well, a 10-star range where the 10th star might actually be a net generating building rather than just zero space conditioning or zero energy consumption or zero emissions. It could be positive, and that actually could put you at 8 stars is zero. I mean, that's the really interesting future we're in. I think it's certainly net generating buildings could be the goal of the future. That was a long answer to a very simple question. So that's 5 minutes. So take a couple. Yep, at the back. Just looking at your watch. Did you want to? No? Okay. Anyone else wanted to ask me a question?
I'd like
pose a question which is more of a political question than a technical one. I think what you're doing technically is probably well accepted by the technical community, but the problem we have in Australia is that the power of the energy industry and the car industry and so on appears to completely, financial power, they've got completely submerge this type of exercise that you and other people are doing. And I guess I'd like to ask, what political contact does ZCA have in Australia to try and overcome this situation?
Yeah, I guess our reports, firstly our reports are primarily technical reports. So we're fairly agnostic from a political from policy point of view at this stage. But obviously we are, we recognise successful policies about and how they could be implemented, particularly feed-in tariffs. Our opinion is that a feed-in tariff is proven to be the most successful policy in the world for rolling out solar. And in Australia, the energy companies, in my opinion, are leading this. It's not even a debate; it's an argument that that feed-in tariffs are expensive, that solar PV is expensive, that it doesn't work. This is not a debate that you have in Germany. In Germany, the debates are: we need to keep the feed-in tariff going. How can we increase the amount of power? But I think the issue is really there's a problem here where we have vertically integrated monopolies in the energy sector who own generation assets and sell you the power. So they have a vested interest in keeping their demand up and selling more power. And they don't like energy independence. So people who have low demand and high PV generation could potentially be fairly independent from the retailers. And they don't like that. And that's probably the number one reason why they're fighting so hard against them. And I don't think there's any straightforward answers as to what to do, but I think we just need to be honest and say, well, is this a good setup? We have these very, AGL, Origin, True Energy represent 80% of the market share in Australia's, energy sector. Anyway, I think I'll leave it there. Thanks. Certainly interested if anyone wants to get involved. We've still got obviously some work to do. There's no economic stuff in there, but we'll be working on that further. Thanks.